Dan, good morning to you.
Morning, guys.
So, the hard work for this piece of broadcasting has been done largely by Eoin, who managed to explain how the groups are going to work. He did have one very tricky question. It was, say we're in the playoffs, the ultimate playoffs, the one-legged playoff semi-final and final. How do they decide who gets home advantage?
Yeah, you see, you're killing me here with this because I actually heard the tail end of your discussion and your plan to drop this on me. And I'm thinking, oh crap, this is one of the things we couldn't really hammer down yesterday. That there's definitely home advantage, like you're playing for home advantage in the semi-final, but the final part needs to be established properly, as far as I'm aware. That's a small bit of a grey area. We were given a media guide with various bits of detail and so on. And definitely you're playing for position in terms of home advantage in the semi. But there's a suggestion the final could be neutral venue.
Oh, yeah.
I just think fully nail that down, because it's going to be a bit of a scramble for flights and stuff, you would imagine, if you win that game on the Saturday or whatever day it might be, and then you're suddenly playing a game 4 days later. It could be a bit of a scramble. So I think they need to nail this down a small bit.
Obviously, everybody criticised the hell out of this when it was floated as an idea, you know, unwieldy, bureaucratic, nightmare, nonsense, meaningless, friendly nonsense. But actually, all of a sudden, when you're a country like Ireland, this is going to be relatively exciting. These games are going to be meaningful, and ultimately, it's a way into the European Championships, and we need whatever help we can get there.
Yeah, it's a strange one. I think if you're one of the nations in League D, that bottom one, this is more exciting than the draw for the main tournament itself, because you've probably got no chance of getting through regular qualifying, but you've got a chance of getting through this. So it's this draw is probably as big as any. I think for a nation like Ireland, it's a bit confusing, really, still in some ways, that we're in League B, and I know Owen would have laid it out already. It's almost very hard to imagine that between A and B, that most of the teams won't get through regular qualifying. Anyway, so I think our chances of getting the playoff are pretty good as a backup, and really our results will just determine, as you say, almost where we might be ranked if we end up needing that playoff. It's still a small bit difficult to sell something when you're talking about a game saying this game is sort of meaningful, but we'll tell you in a year if it really is that meaningful, and that's a slight angle. It might be hard come October, November to really push a game, but we're in a reasonably good position. The higher up you are in the league, there's a very good chance you're going to get a playoff at the end of it, unless there's a very unusual sequence of results.
I have a theory, though, that finishing top of the little group of three might not actually be the best course of action, because there is a good probability here that the entire League A is going to be wiped out in terms of playoff responsibility by the fact of the traditional qualifying, that every single one of those 12 teams are going to be out of the playoff picture because they won't need to qualify for the playoff. And in which case, then they'll start taking the second seeds from League B to make the substitute League A playoff route happen. If Ireland comes second, they could be in an exclusively second and third place playoff situation, which would be very attractive indeed. Obviously, you don't plan for that. You want to win every game. And also, if one League A team fails to make it through traditional qualifying, then you're a bit screwed.
Yeah, and that's the thing where come November, whatever about now, you're going to be looking at all these permutations, trying to figure it all out, and then into next year. The one thing about that scenario about winning your League B group is it means the next time this comes round, you're in a strong position, you know, for the next World Cup, which they need to hammer down how it's going to work then. I still think this is hard sell for people. You know, it's unwieldy, as you said, Ger, and I still think there's an element of that. And I think it's going to be interesting to see today even how they spin it and try and make it clear, because sometimes people just want to watch a game and know what 3 points means. They don't need all these clauses and scenarios. But maybe over time it'll develop its own personality and people will get into the groove and figure out how it works. But this first renewal, I think, is going to be a struggle for some people still.
Yeah, like ultimately it's a competition, and the top 4 teams from each of those groups of 3 in Group A will go through to a semi-finals and the finals next summer, I think, which is exciting given the teams that could be involved in it. But as you mentioned there, it's hard to know if those big teams will actually have the buy-in for this.
Yeah, I think that the selling point for them, I mean, you look at England, for example, in the last even World Cup group, they strolled through it. They're going to get maybe more competitive quality games in the Nations League. I think for the teams maybe in the top league, there's going to be that element to it. They're going to get through the regular groups next year, barring a sort of a calamity. So they might get higher quality games than this. And then for the teams in the League D, the bottom one, I mean, this is amazing for like Belarus and Georgia and these nations who this is their way in. I think it's in B and C, the sort of middle rump that Ireland are in. It's just hard to figure out at this point what the value of it is, and we'll see how seriously it's taken. You know, I think each nation might have a different approach to it. I think Ireland probably need that safety net. We generally end up in the playoff anyway. So, I mean, this is the playoff route now, so I don't think you can be complacent about it, certainly.
No, definitely. Like, so we were looking at some potential draws for today. We could end up in a group with Russia and Denmark, and you have to say, if you're Martin O'Neill, that's not the worst way to blood new players. Away in Russia in a game where you can't have 10 subs at half-time, where there is something riding on the outcome. There's some meaning invested in that more than, say, I'm going to give you your debut against Saudi Arabia in London or against Oman at Fulham. You know, it definitely seems to be a better way of giving international football some standing and credibility in between tournaments.
Yeah, I think that is the test. I mean, I guess in a year's time, if we've had a run of games with no sort of friendlies, no games with Oman, you know, that maybe we can look at our schedule and say, well, that's been a productive year or so that we've had. And it is true, like that you would hope that for Declan Rice or whatever sort of players we're looking to blood later in the year, even guys who are slightly older, you know, Matt Doherty and Greg Cunningham and people like this, that they're coming into games that matter. I'm not sure how Martin O'Neill would feel about playing Denmark twice again. I'd say he could probably do without the I don't know, the symbolism and the stories and the angles that a Denmark game would bring up. But I take the point generally about playing even a Russia or a Czech Republic or a Slovakia or even a Wales, you know, that there'll be games with a bit of intensity around them. But that requires a buy-in from the public too, and you know, they need to go along to a game and from in every country and believe that this matters. And I think they need to see strong teams as well. They maybe don't want to see 7 or 8 experimental teams either, because that sort of plants the feeling that this doesn't matter that much either. And there's a balance to be found, that you want someone like Rice to come in, say, for example, to a side that the other 10 players are first choice, that these are proper games. And I think that's the balance that this competition needs to strike.
Yeah, obviously Martin O'Neill signed his new deal. That story seems to have blown over. It wasn't particularly well managed on all sides over the course of the events. But is it a case of all's well that ends well as far as everybody is concerned?
I suppose today he's going to take questions on it for the first time, and I think this is a necessary stage of the process. But I guess from their perspective, and yeah, the story hasn't necessarily been managed that well from all sides, as you mentioned, and maybe some people feel it's just been a bit of a circus, and they think that maybe even media-wise we've gone on about it a bit too much. But I think the one point is that O'Neill, I guess, needs to give his take in a sort of a satisfactory way to explain what happened, to explain his commitment going forward in terms of if a club comes up, you know, a club job comes up in the next couple of months, and how he will approach that. And I think once that is done today, we can move on. He is signed on for the next couple of years. You just need to hear his take on everything that's happened, because that's the one thing that we've missed, other than that sort of 30-second, hostage negotiation FBI video. A sort of proper question and answers. And I think then we will all move on. I think there will be a natural element today of speak about that, but also speak about some of the points that you mentioned about younger players going forward. What are your plans? And I think then the show does start to move on and look ahead. And it helps when you've got proper fixtures on the list, which is the one thing that we haven't had. We have this vacuum from missing out for the World Cup that's left us with this weird year. Not an exciting year, as people have said, but maybe when the fixtures are laid down on paper, there'll be a bit more clarity about what it all means.
A couple of weeks ago, when it seemed that Martin O'Neill to Stoke was a done deal and that he was definitely not going to be the manager of the Republic of Ireland before things dramatically changed, we suddenly got into this discourse about Roy Keane and whether or not he would follow him, or whether or not he would step up to the mantle and become Republic of Ireland senior manager. Martin O'Neill is going to stick with the same backroom team. Is Roy Keane, is he happy to be in this role? Is he still angling towards becoming a top level manager and just feels he needs 2 more years of experience as assistant?
Yeah, that's a point. I mean, Roy Keane is in Switzerland. He's coming today as well to the draw. I think, all the soundings were, I guess, over the last couple of weeks, with everything that was going on, was that Roy Keane was very much staying with Martin O'Neill, as opposed to ever, splitting away and being a contender for the job if he'd left. it does appear that at this stage of his, I don't know, is development the right word, that it still seems to work for Roy Keane to be working under Martin O'Neill. I'm not sure if the right job has necessarily come up for Keane. I don't think he's been sort of turning down all sorts of offers. There have been offers. I mean, Celtic at the very start of the 5 years, you know, but I'm not sure if there's been a huge amount of clubs, say in England, sort of knocking on the door for him. And strangely enough, maybe going back into Stoke with O'Neill might have been his best route back in that way. And maybe in 2 years' time, we will see a succession sort of plan from an Irish context, and maybe that would be the seamless one for Keane. And it's hard to see O'Neill doing a fourth campaign. I know we're looking far ahead now, and maybe a World Cup cycle might be a time where you would take a punt on a boss who maybe has got less experience. But for now, anyway, Keane is with O'Neill, and I don't think he's angling to get away. I think he seems content enough, but we'll see. I mean, they still have to get through the next year. There's still a feeling, you know, amongst the public, as we know, as you would get it from messages into the show and so on, that people are a bit ambivalent to them staying. And I still feel that they need to move beyond Denmark and sort of get a couple of good results the next year, because otherwise I think the mood could still be maybe toxic is strong, but there's definitely there could be a negativity around the place, and that shouldn't be forgotten. I mean, a lot of people are still sore and not convinced about this team now, and they need to get a couple of results over the next year as well and get the balance right again with experimenting and not just taking a couple of defeats either. That could make things pretty iffy.
That's why I think this draw is of relevance today, and that's why it feels like they're going to take it very seriously, because while they do definitely need new blood, they also need to make sure that the fans are still as with them as they were for most of that qualifying campaign. Like certainly the 15 minutes before Denmark actually scored at Lansdowne Road was pretty amazing, and that was a clear sign that the team and the fans were unified. You know, we shouldn't take that for granted either. But just to move on then, Seamus Coleman obviously played 50 odd minutes last night for Everton, and there is a sense, notwithstanding the James McCarthy injury, that they will have a bunch of new players to look at, while there are also players like Seamus Coleman there that will be the bedrock of this team heading into the next 4 years of wherever these campaigns take us.
Yeah, I mean, but Coleman, as you say, he is the forefront of that. He is the leader of it. He's going to be, I think, 31 when the finals come to Dublin, you know, in 2020. I mean, this is, I suppose, the prime of his career campaign for Coleman in some ways, this sort of 2.5 year cycle. And I mean, that is the ultimate regret about missing out in the summer. I mean, it's stating the obvious how much he was missed, but I think he is someone who's very popular, well liked. He's a good leader for this dressing room. You can even see on that Everton game last night, the young lads there are sort of, you know, they're looking up to him. He is now firmly a senior player, and as much as you mentioned, we do have some younger players emerging, but I mean, there's not a huge raft of them, and they don't have much experience, the ones we're talking about now. We need Coleman at the forefront of it. I mean, Robbie Brady is obviously on the long-term injury list at the moment. And we have those handful of players that this is their time now. They've stepped out of the shadow of the O'Shea and even the Walters, the Glenn Whelan. And that generation now are very much in limbo in terms of where they stand. And this is the time for Coleman to come forward and really be at the forefront of this group with McLean and Brady and Hendrick and whoever may emerge from the others. We do have a long time till the next really big game, as much as these games in the autumn matter to a point. But we have a window now where, you know, you have a year of transition really. But you need Coleman there. You need him to be leading it. You need him to be meeting the new players that come into the camp and being around. So it is a boost. It's not the boost that would have been if we were in a World Cup, but it's still a boost to have him back all the same and to have him setting the examples in Turkey maybe in 2 months' time in that training camp, that, you know, that he is a part of that from the start. And this is a new cycle and a new team to a point. 17-year-old
Michael Obafemi is the latest Irish player who has represented Ireland at underage level, who is suddenly being tapped up by other nations. We've seen this movie before. What's the likely outcome, do you think?
Yeah, it's hard to read. I mean, it's a bit of a surprise that he played the other day, and certainly, you know, from reading the reports of people who I suppose cover the underage scene very, you know, sort of on a daily basis almost, and I said, you know, John Fallon in our newspaper mentioning the that it's maybe Nigeria that are the real rival in this case, maybe as opposed to the English side of things. It's a difficult one. I mean, he has been involved in the most recent international window. He was playing for Ireland. You would hope that you've done enough at that point to keep him on board. And it has been mentioned that in March we have 21s games, we have important under-19 games, you have this senior training camp, and it will be interesting to see how they play it, because we sometimes look back in history to like the Czech Republic, I think it was in '98, when Mick McCarthy played all these players at once, 5 or 6 debutants, and you wonder, I think Martin O'Neill would be probably conscious of the optics of trying to present Turkey as well as a new team and a new era, and I think he might fast track a couple. I'm not sure if Obafemi would, it could be a bit early for him, but maybe he's moved up the ladder to the sort of the 21s, and do they look at doing things that way? But I think he'll bring a couple away with him to Turkey. I'm not sure who they'll be. I mean, Rice obviously would be the obvious one, but we have seen this movie before, and sometimes we're a bit paranoid about every player that comes through, that we fear we're going to lose them. But the nature of international football now has made that possible. And to be honest, we play that game with players from Northern Ireland, so we can't get too moralistic about the sharks that circle, because in another context we are that shark.
Totally, but presumably Nations Cup games, if he gets capped in one of those, that would count as having made your decision, and that's it?
Well, there's a wonderful question as well. I think UEFA are saying that, but we need to clarify it, because in the World Cup, in the world ranking stages, it's been given the same status as a friendly. Right. But I think the associations are indicating that it should count as competitive. But again, there's so many questions to clarify. What is the standing of these games, and that's something we're looking to ascertain today as well. But if it did count, I think you might see definitely a couple of 85th minute substitutions later on in the year if that was the case.
Yeah, no harm.
Just one last point on that, Dan, in terms of what we could be missing if Obafemi doesn't choose Ireland's. Like, there's not exactly a great track record in recent history. I think you mentioned John Fallon there, and I think he was pointing out in your paper yesterday just about the last 7 or 8 underage Irish internationals who've appeared and made a debut in the Premier League, that none of them really, maybe one of them, is being capped for Ireland, that it's not to do with them being selected by other countries, it's to do with the fact that they turn out not to live up to that potential really, or maybe they just haven't reached that potential yet. So I don't think Martin O'Neill is going to be overly in a hurry to cap Michael Obafemi, because ultimately you need to be good enough to play for the Ireland senior team.
Yeah, no, I think there is a point in that. I mean, it is striking that sometimes you do get teenagers who get a game. It might suit their Premier League club at that period in time to build a couple of players. We saw that with Kevin Toner at Aston Villa before. It was a manager on the way out, effectively, trying to give some guys a chance, as opposed to their emergence being a real sign that they're going to be there for the long haul. And I mean, if you were to go through the Irish side at the moment and ask how many of them were mapped as teenagers, I mean, you think of the likes of Seamus Coleman and sort of John Walters, even Sean Maguire, who has come through in the last year. We talk about the likes of Matt Doherty and Greg Cunningham and players, maybe Alan Brown, players who might be ready now. They actually are guys who are maturing in their early 20s and coming to the boil then almost. And that is the profile of Irish player that history has shown, that they last the course, the slightly later bloomers. So yeah, you can't place too much stock in it. You can't necessarily rush them. I think Rice looks to be an exception to the rule. I think Rice looks to be the business, and he is the one that they'll need to be taken very seriously. But I do agree. I mean, Obafemi had a cameo on Sunday. I don't think we should be losing the plot over it completely and losing the run of ourselves and being desperate to tie them down. But I think it's maybe the later developer. The young lads going to Turkey could be 24, 25, and that is realistically where we're at.
One last point, Nathan has just tweeted, if Ireland win our group in the Nations League, we'll get a top 2 seeding for the Euro 2020 draw, a backup playoff for Euro 2020 if we need it, and promotion to the top division of the Nations League, which should guarantee a top 2 seeding for the 2022 World Cup draw. So there's definitely an impetus and a momentum to be gained from a good draw today and good performances over the next 12 months.
Yeah, no, the seeding aspect is one, I should have mentioned. I guess if you talk about the short-term importance, the clearest one is your seeding for the draw, the Euro 2020 draw in Dublin in December. And I mean, we've had mixed results with draws in recent years. I mean, I know we were 4th seeds last time round, but I still think the draw was pretty kind. But yeah, I think that is something that I think we'll hear Martin O'Neill make this point today. Certainly something that's very tangible is that good results, and you will be seeded second come later this year, and that should make things clearer going forward, in terms of our 2020 prospects. So there is something to play for, and I think from a football angle, it's easy to sell. I just think for the punters going to the game, I'm not sure if that's something that really energises them, cheering a great seeding, So that's going to be the challenge when we get to September, October, to sell these might need to win games to people.
All right, good stuff, Dan. Thanks a million. Enjoy the draw.
Cheers, guys.
Hey, hope you enjoyed that latest offering from Off the Ball. If you want to subscribe, and you should, check out just up here. All our latest stuff is just down here. Generally, knock yourself out.